It was a quiet, ordinary night in the small town of Maplewood, the kind of night where the wind barely rustled the leaves, and the only sound was the faint hum of a distant train. Life here was simple, predictable, and safe, or so everyone thought. But by the next morning, that sense of security was shattered. The Henderson family, a family that had lived in Maplewood for generations, had vanished without a trace. Doors were locked from the inside, lights were off, and every trace of life, meals, belongings, even the family dog was gone. It was as if the house itself had swallowed them. Whole * neighbors who had known the Hendersons all their lives were stunned. Mary Henderson, the mother, was known for her warmth, always waving at people on her morning walks. Robert, the father, worked at the town's hardware store and had a quiet, dependable nature. The children, Emma and little Jack, were the pride of the neighborhood, always playing in the yard and laughing under the sun. Everyone loved them, and now no one knew where they were or why they had disappeared. When Officer Daniels arrived at the Henderson house, he immediately felt that something was off. The front door was locked, yet there were no signs of forced entry. The living room looked untouched, as if everyone had simply vanished mid-day. A half-finished puzzle sat on the coffee table. A plate of dinner remained on the counter, and the television still flickered with the evening news. Nothing had been disturbed, nothing stolen, nothing empty. Police scoured the house for clues. They found nothing that made sense. No note, no ransom demand, no unusual footprints outside. Even the family's car was parked neatly in the driveway, untouched. It was as if they had all disappeared into thin air. The investigators interviewed neighbors, friends, co-workers, anyone who might know a hint about what had happened. But every lead went cold. Every witness insisted they had seen the Hendersons go to bed that night, just like any other evening. And yet, by morning, they were gone. Rumors started to spread in Maplewood. Some whispered that it was a kidnapping. Others feared something darker. Some thought the family had fled on their own. But the more the police dug, the stranger it all became. The Hendersons had no enemies, no financial troubles, no history of conflict. They were an ordinary family with ordinary lives. And yet, they had vanished. One detail puzzled the investigators more than anything else. The security cameras around the neighborhood didn't record a single unusual movement near the Henderson house. No cars had been seen approaching or leaving. No shadows, It was as if someone had simply erased the family from existence. As the days went on, the story gripped the town. Flyers were posted, alerts sent out, and detectives worked around the clock. Yet the Hendersons were nowhere to be found. Friends described them as joyful, caring, loving, the kind of family anyone would feel safe around. And now, with their sudden disappearance, fear crept into the hearts of Maplewood residents. If something like this could happen to the Hendersons, could it happen to anyone? The police timeline suggested the disappearance happened sometime between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., yet no one saw, heard, or noticed anything unusual. Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit was still on her bed. Jack's little toy truck remained parked on the floor as if frozen in time. Even the family dog, Max, had vanished, leaving behind a small puddle of water by his food bowl. Every detail told a story of normalcy, but the absence of the family screamed the opposite. Detective Harper, leading the investigation, was baffled. He had worked on many difficult cases in his career, but the Henderson disappearance was unlike anything he had seen. He stared at the empty house, walking from room to room, examining every inch for something, anything, that might provide a clue. Nothing, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case was bigger than it seemed. Something about the stillness, the silence, and the untouched home didn't feel natural. It felt deliberate, and it felt dangerous. By the end of the first week, the media had picked up the story. News crews lined the streets, reporting on the eerie, empty house where a happy family had lived. Social media exploded with theories, some plausible, some bizarre. But as the speculation grew, the truth remained hidden, locked behind closed doors and unanswered questions. And then came the anonymous tip, a voice on the phone, trembling and careful, claiming they knew something about the disappearance. But before they could say more, the line went dead. The call traced to a disconnected number. It was a brief flicker of hope, immediately snuffed out, leaving nothing but more questions and a creeping dread. The town of Maplewood tried to move on, but nothing was the same. Children whispered about the house where no one lives. Neighbors glanced suspiciously at empty windows, and every quiet night was filled with unease. The Henderson family's absence became a shadow over the town, an unsolved mystery that refused to fade. As the investigation dragged on, with no answers. Detective Harper knew one thing for certain. The Hendersons hadn't simply walked away. Something or someone had taken them. But who, and why? And most importantly, where were they now? And that's where our story begins. In a town gripped by fear, with a family who disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only questions, whispers, and a mystery the police still can't solve. Maplewood had always been a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a gentle pace. The streets were lined with tidy houses, gardens full of flowers, and the occasional sound of children playing in the distance. Yet, beneath the calm surface, life wasn't always as simple as it seemed. Families had secrets, people had pasts, and even the most ordinary streets held stories that were rarely told. But the disappearance of the Hendersons turned those hidden corners of the town into questions, and questions into fears. The Hendersons themselves had seemed like the perfect family from the outside. Mary, the mother, had a warm smile that could light up a room. She taught at the local elementary school and had a way with children that made every student feel seen and heard. Robert, the father, had been a quiet presence in the community for years, respected by neighbors and coworkers alike. His work at the hardware store kept him busy, but he was always willing to lend a hand, fix a fence, or help with a repair at a neighbor's home. Emma, the older of the two children, was 12 years old, bright and full of curiosity. She loved reading mysteries and often imagined herself as a detective, solving crimes and uncovering secrets. Little Jack, only 6, had a laugh that could fill an entire room. He loved building things with his toy blocks, creating little worlds that reflected the innocence and joy of childhood. Together, they were the kind of family that made Maplewood feel like home. Family people looked up to and loved. But for all their warmth and normalcy, there were whispers that perhaps not everything was as perfect as it seemed. A few neighbors mentioned small oddities, little things that, at the time, didn't make sense. Mary had been seen taking long walks late at night, alone, staring at the horizon as if searching for something she couldn't find. Robert had been quieter than usual, sometimes lost in thought, lingering on the porch long after the sun had set. And the children, while cheerful and playful, sometimes spoke of dreams that seemed vivid, too strange for kids their age, dreams that made them wake up in the middle of the night, frightened, clutching each other for comfort. No one had thought much of it. People often see small oddities in those they know and chalk them up to the stresses of everyday life. But now, in the shadow of the disappearance, those details seemed significant. Detective Harper went over these accounts again and again in his mind, trying to find patterns, trying to see the connections that might explain what had happened. Every story, every detail, became a piece of a puzzle that stubbornly refused to fit together. The house itself was a source of quiet unease. Walking through the rooms, one could feel the presence of lives interrupted. The kitchen was still stocked with groceries that had not been put away. Plates sat on the counter as if someone had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. The living room held memories frozen in TMI family photo on the mantle, a blanket tossed over the couch, the soft hum of a radio that had been left on. Even the children's toys, scattered across the floor, felt like echoes of life, small reminders that this was a home once filled with laughter and warmth. Detective Harper couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was trying to tell him something. There was a stillness here that didn't feel natural. It was too quiet, too deliberate. He moved from room to room, looking for anything that might provide a clue, a misplaced object, a hidden note, anything that would explain how a family could simply vanish in the night. But every inch of the house seemed untouched, pristine, almost staged. And that, more than anything, made the disappearance so unsettling. Outside Maplewood had become a town in limbo. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, their eyes constantly darting to the Henderson house. The local grocery store clerk noticed how often people bought extra candles or flashlights, as if expecting the lights to go out again. Children were warned to stay close to home, and parents walked the streets at night, tense and vigilant. The fear wasn't loud, but it was constant, a quiet pressure that weighed on everyone's mind. Even the Hendersons' friends and extended family were caught in a strange limbo. They had no answers, no explanations, and each call or visit to the police station ended with the same chilling response: "We don't know." Some tried to piece together the night of the disappearance from their own memories. They remembered the last time they saw Mary, Robert, Emma, or Jack. They remembered the small details, the way Mary had smiled when she saw a neighbor, the way Robert had joked about fixing the leaky faucet, the way Emma had waved goodbye while clutching her favorite book, the way Jack had run to hug his grandmother just a week before. And now all those moments seemed painfully permanent, impossible to hold on to, because they were gone. The media coverage added another layer of tension. News outlets painted the disappearance in dramatic terms, using phrases like mysterious, vanishing, and family disappears without a trace. Social media was filled with theories, some plausible, some wild. People speculated about everything from abductions to secret witnesses to supernatural events. Each post, each comment, spread the fear and uncertainty further. But despite all the speculation, despite the hundreds of eyes watching and analyzing, no one knew what had truly happened. And so, the mystery deepened. Detective Harper spent hours at the Henderson house, walking the floors, examining every detail, speaking to anyone who might know something. He felt a weight in the air, a tension that pressed down on him and the rest of the investigators. Every unanswered question became heavier, more urgent. Every small clue that led nowhere felt like a taunt from the unknown. Asterisk one night, while walking the perimeter of the house, Harper noticed something at a faint indentation in the grass behind the garage. It was small, barely noticeable, but it suggested movement, something or someone having passed through. Yet when he followed it, it disappeared abruptly, leaving no trace of where it might have gone. It was as if the ground itself had swallowed it. That night, Harper couldn't sleep. The image of the empty yard, the missing family, and the vanished footprints haunted him. He knew that this case wasn't going to be solved easily. It wasn't just a missing family, it was a puzzle wrapped in silence, a riddle with pieces that didn't want to be found. Asterisk and, as the days turned into weeks, the fear of the unknown settled over Maplewood like a fog. Families locked their doors, children avoided the Henderson house, and whispers filled every corner of the town. What had happened to the Hendersons? Who or what had taken them? And why had there been no sign of struggle, no call for help, no trace of their presence at all? Asterisk Detective Harper knew the answers were out there somewhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. But until that day came, the town remained trapped in the unsettling gap between reality and the impossible. And as the sun set each night, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, one question lingered in every mind. Could this happen again? Could any family vanish without a trace, leaving nothing but silence behind? Asterisk the Hendersons' disappearance wasn't just a mystery, it was a warning. And whatever had taken them was still out there, somewhere, silent, patient, and watching. As the investigation stretched into its second week, Maplewood's quiet unease began to ripple into every corner of the town. Detective Harper found himself juggling multiple angles, each more perplexing than the last. On one hand, there was the house itself, untouched and eerily quiet, almost like a trap that had simply swallowed the family. On the other, there were the people, the neighbors, friends, and even strangers who all claimed to have seen nothing, yet seemed to carry small hints of unease in their eyes. Harper knew he had to look beyond the obvious, into the hidden stories that might be linked to the Hendersons' sudden disappearance. Asterisk one neighbor, Mrs. Ellison, lived directly across the street from the Henderson house. She had been the first to notice something was wrong. It was too quiet, she told Harper, her voice trembling slightly. I woke up that night around midnight, and it was as if the world had stopped. Not a sound, not even the wind. And then, in the morning, they were just gone. Harper listened carefully, noting every detail. But when he asked if she had seen anyone around, she shook her head. Her fear was palpable, and though she claimed to have seen nothing, Harper couldn't ignore the way her eyes darted toward the empty driveway as she spoke. Asterisk meanwhile, a local journalist named Daniel Rivers had caught wind of the case and began digging on his own. He wasn't content to just report what the police said. He wanted answers. Rivers interviewed townspeople, pieced together fragments of past events, and even tried to find patterns in the Hendersons' daily routines. Through his reporting, a picture began to emerge of a family that, on the surface, appeared ordinary, yet had a subtle undercurrent of secrecy. Mary had a journal she rarely let anyone read. Robert had been making late-night trips to a small storage unit on the outskirts of town. Emma had been sketching strange symbols in her notebook, ones that her teachers had noticed but dismissed as childlike imagination. Jack, though too young to fully understand, had woken in the middle of the night several times in the weeks leading up to the disappearance, crying about shadows in his room. Asterisk each of these details, small on their own, now took on an eerie significance. Harper couldn't tell if they were signs of danger, coincidence, or something far stranger. The detective spent hours going over Mary's journal, which had been recovered from a hidden compartment in her bedside table. Most of it was mundane lists, notes about school projects, grocery items, but there were passages that hinted at worry. Mary wrote about feeling watched, about strange occurrences in the house that she couldn't explain. At first, Harper thought it might just be stress, but combined with other oddities, it painted a picture of unease that seemed impossible to ignore. Asterisk the storage unit Robert had been visiting also raised questions. Inside, police found nothing illegal, nothing that indicated criminal activity, yet the unit had a strange aura of secrecy. Harper felt it instinctively. Boxers were arranged oddly, with some areas deliberately left untouched. There were no fingerprints beyond Robert's, no evidence that anyone had accessed it in weeks. It was a dead end, but one that didn't feel like a coincidence. Asterisk, rumors began to spread that the Hendersons' disappearance might be connected to something outside Maplewood. Some whispered about strangers in town, people who appeared and vanished with no explanation. Others speculated about past secrets, old debts, or hidden disputes. Yet, Harper found that none of the usual suspects fit. There was no motive, no opportunity that made sense, and the sheer impossibility of the situation only added to the tension. The town's sense of safety was eroding, replaced by a creeping fear that nothing and no one was truly secure. Asterisk meanwhile, Emma's school became a focal point for small, unsettling mysteries. Teachers mentioned her drawings against symbols that didn't resemble anything familiar, scrawled in a way that seemed intentional. Some students recalled her talking about people in the shadows or whispers at night. though they assumed she was imagining things. But now, with her disappearance, those words took on a weight that no one could dismiss. Harper wondered whether Emma had seen or known something that adults had overlooked, something that might hold a key to the mystery. Max, the family dog, had vanished as well, and that absence gnawed at Harper more than he expected. Dogs, after all, are rarely left behind in fear or confusion. The fact that Max was missing suggested that whatever had taken the family had done so with precision and awareness. It wasn't just a random act, it was deliberate, and that thought made Harper uneasy. Whoever or whatever was involved had planned this carefully. Even as he pursued these leads, Harper noticed another pattern: the timing of the disappearance. It was late at night, but not too late, just past the hours when the town typically went silent. It suggested someone familiar with the neighborhood's rhythms. Someone who knew when the streets would be empty, when the neighbors would sleep, when no one would notice. And yet, despite that, there were no witnesses. No cars, no footprints. It was as if the Hendersons had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but questions and fear. Subplots began to intertwine as the story unfolded. Mrs. Ellison's grandson had been playing near the Hendersons' yard the night of the disappearance. He claimed to have seen a figure moving, but he couldn't describe it clearly. Daniel Rivers' investigation revealed that the storage unit Robert visited had once been rented by someone with a criminal past, though the timeline didn't match the disappearance. And then there were the strange messages left on social media, cryptic posts by unknown accounts that seemed to reference Maplewood, shadows, and families disappearing. Harper knew that some of these could be coincidences, others deliberate attempts to mislead, but combined, they added layers of tension that no one could ignore. As the town held its collective breath, Harper began to realize that the Henderson disappearance wasn't just a simple missing persons case. It was a story with many angles, multiple threads, and layers that might never fully unravel. Every clue seemed to open more questions than it answered. Every new witness added a piece to a puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. And everywhere Harper looked, there was the same feeling: the family had been taken, and whatever force had done, it was still out there, watching, waiting, hidden in the quiet shadows of Maplewood. Evenings in the town grew tense. Streetlights flickered in the corners, doors were locked, and conversations often turned to hushed whispers about what had happened. Parents kept children close, neighbors eyed each other suspiciously, and the Henderson house stood as a silent monument to a mystery no one could solve. And while the police, journalists, and townspeople all searched for answers, the sense of danger lingered, growing heavier with every passing day. Detective Harper knew one truth that he couldn't share with anyone yet. This case wasn't just about finding a missing family. It was about understanding the impossible, confronting the unknown, and staying vigilant against something that didn't play by the rules of logic or reason. And deep down, he feared that time was running out, not just for answers, but for the Hendersons themselves. As days turned into weeks, the tension in Maplewood became almost unbearable. Every night, Detective Harper walked the Henderson property alone, flashlight in hand, listening to the faint sounds of the town settling into darkness. The empty house seemed to breathe, each creak of the floorboards a reminder of what had been lost. Inside, the rooms remained frozen in time, but outside, shadows stretched longer, darker, and somehow more menacing. Harper couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching, waiting for the right moment. Reports of strange activity began to surface. A neighbor claimed they saw a figure standing at the edge of the Henderson yard, just beyond the trees, moving too smoothly, almost gliding. Another said they heard whispers in the night, soft words they couldn't understand but that made their skin crawl. Children in the area whispered about the empty house that eats people, stories growing with each retelling, and adults shared anxious glances, hoping it was only imagination. But Harper knew it wasn't. The calm had been shattered, and the longer the Hendersons remained missing, the heavier the air became with fear. Harper focused on the Hendersons' personal routines, hoping to find a clue that might reveal why this had happened. Mary had been meticulous about keeping lists, schedules, and notes. Robert had routines so ingrained that any deviation would be noticeable. Emma and Jack's habits were predictable, yet the sudden halt of every familiar pattern hinted at a carefully executed plan. The detective began piecing together small fragments: Emma's sketches, Mary's entries about feeling watched, Robert's late-night storage unit trips. Each fragment seemed ordinary alone, but together, they hinted at a tension that no one in town had fully understood. Even the small details became unnerving. The Hendersons' mailbox remained empty, yet the papers inside were untouched. The garden, normally cared for by Mary, had begun to overgrow. The swing in the backyard creaked slightly, as though moved by invisible hands. And Max's food bowl sat on the porch, dry and untouched. Harper couldn't explain any of it, but he felt the weight of something pressing down on the house, something unseen and patient. Meanwhile, Daniel Rivers, the journalist, had begun receiving cryptic messages through his social media accounts. They were short, fragmented, and chilling. "They see you too," Time is closer than you think, and the family knows more than you believe. Rivers wasn't sure if the messages were from someone playing a cruel game, or if they were connected to the Henderson disappearance. Either way, they added a new layer of fear to the case. Harper met with Rivers, reviewing the messages together, each word heavier than the last. They agreed that whoever had sent them knew more than they were letting on. As Harper dug deeper, the small anomalies in the town began to connect. Lights flickered in houses near the Henderson property at odd hours. Pets went missing or acted strangely. Some residents reported hearing footsteps behind them on empty streets. The town itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next event, whatever it might be. And everywhere Harper looked, there were small signs of a presence just beyond the edge of vision, in shadows that moved against the natural patterns of night. One night, Harper returned to the Henderson house later than usual. The moon had risen high, casting a pale glow across the lawn. As he passed the back porch, a sudden chill swept across his face. He froze. There was a faint sound, barely audible, a soft scratching, like nails against wood. He spun the flashlight toward the noise, illuminating the edge of the backyard, but found nothing. The air seemed thicker, heavier, and for the first time, Harper felt the deep human fear of being watched by something beyond understanding. He stepped closer, but the sound stopped. Silence returned, unnatural and complete, pressing into his chest. Back in town. Rumors had begun spreading about possible motives, but no one had answers. The Hendersons had no known enemies, no debts, no conflicts. Theories ranged from the mundane to the impossible: kidnapping, secret witness protection, cult involvement, even paranormal speculation. Each theory had supporters and skeptics, but all shared the same unsettling truth: nothing explained the precision of the disappearance. Harper and his team reviewed the data again, meticulously cross-checking times, locations, and testimonies. Every lead seemed to vanish into the same void as the family. The psychological strain on the town became evident. Parents kept children inside after dark. The streets emptied earlier than usual, and gatherings that once brought comfort now sparked whispered conversations about shadows and unseen watchers. Even those who hadn't known the Hendersons well felt the impact. The disappearance had left a mark on Maplewood, an invisible tension that settled over every home, every street, every lighted window. Meanwhile, small discoveries hinted at a larger picture, though Harper could not yet see it clearly. Emma's sketches, once dismissed as childish imagination, began to show patterns that resembled symbols found in obscure texts about missing persons and unexplained disappearances. Mary's journal entries hinted at anxiety over strangers in town, and Robert's storage unit trips, though mundane on the surface, seemed to coincide with subtle changes in the neighborhood: the flickering lights, the sudden quiet, the shifts in the wind. Every clue suggested someone or something had been observing the Hendersons for weeks, maybe months, planning with meticulous care. And then, one evening, a breakthrough, or what Harper feared might be a false hope. A local hiker reported seeing lights moving inside the Henderson house after dark, not flickering candlelight or the reflection of passing cars, but deliberate, controlled movements, as if someone or something was going from room to room. Harper rushed to the scene, but the house remained silent, doors locked, windows untouched. There was no sign of life, yet the reports persisted. The tension in Harper's chest grew heavier. This wasn't a simple disappearance anymore. It was evolving, becoming something larger, something that challenged his understanding of reality. As the investigation intensified, Harper realized that the town itself was becoming a character in the story. Every street, every alley, every hidden corner seemed alive with possibility, holding secrets that could explain the impossible. Friends turned suspicious, neighbors spoke in hushed tones, and even familiar places felt alien under the shadow of the mystery. Maplewood was no longer a safe, sleepy town. It was a stage for something unseen, something patient, and something relentless. And through it all, Harper could feel Itan's unrelenting presence, watching, waiting, shaping the night around the empty Henderson house. Every lead, every strange event, every whispered rumor added to a growing storm, building toward a point he could feel but could not yet see. The questions multiplied, the tension sharpened, and the sense of dread became almost tangible. Whoever had taken the Hendersons, or whatever had taken them, was still out there, and the longer they remained missing, the closer the town came to the edge of an answer that no one might be ready to face. The stage was set. Shadows had lengthened, whispers had grown louder, and somewhere, beyond the calm facades of Maplewood, the truth waited, patient and hidden, ready to confront anyone who dared to uncover it. Just when Detective Harper thought he had seen every strange angle of the Henderson case, a new and unsettling development turned everything upside down. One morning, the town woke to discover a series of cryptic messages, spray-painted on the walls of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Maplewood. They weren't just random symbols, they formed words, phrases, and questions that sent a chill through anyone who read them. Do you see us? Time is borrowed, not owned. They never left. They are watching. The messages were written in a strange, jagged script, almost childlike but deliberate, and no one could explain who had done it or why. The discovery immediately raised the stakes. Harper went straight to the scene, flashlight in hand, walking cautiously through the empty graffiti-laden warehouse. It smelled faintly of damp wood and paint, but beyond that there was an oppressive silence that made him feel exposed. Every step echoed unnaturally, and for a moment, Harper felt as if the shadows themselves were moving in the corners of his vision. The messages weren't just threatening, they hinted that the Henderson family's disappearance was part of something much larger, something calculated and almost impossible to comprehend. At the same time, Daniel Rivers, the journalist, received an anonymous email. It contained photos, grainy, unclear images of a house remarkably similar to the Henderson home, taken from a distance in the dead of night. Each photo was timestamped, showing activity inside the house long after the family had disappeared. Shadows moved in ways that didn't align with human patterns. In one image, Harper noticed something disturbing, a silhouette that seemed unnaturally tall and thin, standing perfectly still in the hallway. The email also contained a single line: "They are closer than you think." Rivers immediately contacted Harper, and together they realized that this was no ordinary disappearance. It was part of a deliberate, unfolding plan. The town's anxiety reached a fever pitch. Families double-checked locks. Children were kept inside after dark, and every sound outside a window caused a shiver of fear. People whispered about curses, about strangers in the night, about invisible watchers that had lingered in Maplewood far longer than anyone suspected. Even Harper, who had spent his career chasing criminals, felt unnerved. There was a precision to this case that he had never encountered. Whoever was behind the disappearance wasn't just clever, they were patient, methodical, and terrifyingly calculated. Meanwhile, Harper uncovered a disturbing pattern in the Hendersons' recent past. Robert had been withdrawing money from the bank more frequently than usual, though he had no outstanding debts. Mary had been making unexplainable trips late at night, often returning with a nervous, distracted look. Emma's sketches, once dismissed as innocent, now seemed to encode messages in the shapes she drew arrows lines, patterns that Harper could not decipher immediately. And Jack, in a rare moment of clarity, had once told his babysitter about the people who live in mirrors, words that had sounded like the imagination of a sick. But now Harper couldn't ignore. Then came another twist that sent shockwaves through the investigation. A local delivery driver reported seeing someone matching Robert Henderson's description walking along the edge of town, hours after the family had supposedly disappeared. The man's face was obscured by shadows, his movements stiff and deliberate, almost mechanical. Harper checked the timestamps, re-examined the security footage from nearby streets, and the figure didn't match anyone living in Maplewood at that time. This raised a chilling possibility. Either someone was impersonating Robert Henderson, or the truth was far stranger than anyone could imagine. At the same time, small subplots began to intertwine, in ways Harper hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Ellison admitted that her grandson had secretly followed a figure he saw near the Henderson house in the days leading up to the disappearance. He described it as not quite human, moving strangely, too fast to be Robert, Mary, or anyone familiar. Daniel Rivers tracked down a local historian who spoke of past disappearances in Maplewood that had never been solved, all occurring in odd patterns around the same season. The historian hinted that the town had a long hidden history of unexplained vanishing incidents, each leaving no trace behind. Harper felt the weight of this knowledge, realizing that the Henderson case might not be an isolated event, but part of something recurring and deeply rooted in the town's history. As Harper pieced together these layers, he began to notice a connection between the messages, the shadows, and the recent sightings. Everything suggested that the Hendersons were being manipulated, controlled, or monitored by an unknown force, something capable of anticipating their moves, understanding their routines, and striking without warning. And yet, there was still no direct contact, no clear evidence, no confrontation. The family remained missing, leaving a vacuum of fear that seemed to infect every part of Maplewood. Then came the first direct hint of danger. A neighbor's security camera captured footage of the Henderson yard at 2:13 a.m. and human figure standing in the shadows. Watching the house, the figure didn't move naturally. It seemed to glide, then vanish entirely without a trace. The footage sent chills through Harper and his team. Whoever or whatever was responsible for the disappearance was not only clever, but possibly capable of things beyond normal understanding. It wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was an escalating threat, a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit into the reality Harper had known. Meanwhile, tensions within the investigative team grew. Some officers wanted to treat the case like a standard kidnapping, chasing every lead in the neighborhood. Harper argued for patience, observation, and connecting patterns, insisting that the disappearance and the messages were all part of something far bigger. Daniel Rivers, driven by curiosity and the weight of public pressure, continued to push his own investigations, sometimes putting himself dangerously close to unknown threats. The lines between ally and risk blurred, and the pressure began to mount. Maplewood itself became almost claustrophobic. Every night, the town seemed to shrink under the shadow of the Henderson mystery. Streetlights flickered more often, winds whispered through alleys with unusual persistence, and the air carried a strange tension that even the most skeptical residents could feel. The whispers grew louder, people began locking their doors earlier, and children avoided playing outside, sensing something unseen. The Henderson house had become a focal point of fear, a landmark of the unknown, and every passing day without answers only heightened the dread. And just when Harper thought he had exhausted every lead, the second twist hit. Evidence surfaced that suggested the Hendersons themselves might not have been entirely innocent in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. Strange phone records, cryptic notes, and unusual purchases hinted at involvement in something secretive, something they hadn't shared with anyone. It wasn't criminal in a conventional sense, but it suggested that the family had known more than they revealed. This revelation reframed the entire case. The Hendersons weren't just victims, they were players in a complex story, and the forces that took them were far from ordinary. As Harper stared at the maps, photos, and cryptic messages strewn across his desk, he realized one truth: the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. The disappearance wasn't just about a family, it was about a pattern, a hidden network of events, and a presence that had already proven it could operate beyond the comprehension of normal logic. The town of Maplewood was caught in a slow tightening grip, and Harper knew that whatever came next would push everyone to the edge. The night Harper had feared finally arrived. The air in Maplewood was thick with tension, the streets eerily silent, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Every officer, every journalist, and every concerned neighbor seemed to feel at the pull of the unknown, the anticipation of something monumental about to unfold. Harper approached the Henderson house with Daniel Rivers by his side, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the familiar yet haunted structure. For weeks, every lead had spiraled into dead ends or cryptic warnings, but tonight, Harper felt that the truth, no matter how dark, would finally emerge. As they entered the house, the silence pressed against them. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind through the trees seemed louder than normal. And then they saw it. The living room lights flickering in an unnatural rhythm, shadows dancing on the walls without any source. Harper's heart pounded as he moved closer, scanning every corner. There, in the center of the room, where Mary, Robert, Emma, and Jack stood together, unharmed but strange, almost as if they had been frozen in a trance. Their eyes were wide, and for a moment, Harper could see fear mixed with recognition, as though they had been waiting for him all along. What happened to you? Harper asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mary stepped forward, trembling, and spoke in a low, steady voice. We weren't gone. We were chosen. There's a pattern, a presence that watches us, tests us, and we couldn't leave until we understood it. Robert added, it's not just us. It's Maplewood. It's been happening for decades. Families disappear when they uncover too much. We had to survive the test. Emma held Jack close, her voice shaking. We saw the shadows. We heard them whisper. They told us secrets about the town, about people we thought we knew. Harper struggled to comprehend what he was hearing. The pieces fell into place: the shadows, the symbols, the messages, the figures in the yard, the strange activity in the storage unit. It wasn't a simple crime. It was something beyond logic, something that had been part of Maplewood's history for generations. Families were vanishing, but the Hendersons had survived because they had recognized the pattern and resisted it, learning its rules before it could claim them. As Harper tried to make sense of it, a sudden movement caught his eye. The shadows in the corners of the room weren't just tricks of the light, they were shifting, coalescing into shapes. Harper froze as the darkness seemed to pulse, alive, intelligent, and aware of their presence. The air grew colder, heavier, and the whispers filled the room, not in words, but in feelings: fear, warning, a demand for obedience. The house itself seemed to vibrate with tension. The climax of the mystery was here, and for a moment, Harper wondered if they had all come too close. If anyone could survive what was watching them. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the presence retreated. The shadows melted back into the corners, leaving only the flicker of the lights as evidence of what had occurred. The family exhaled, trembling but alive. Harper realized that the disappearance had never been about harming them. It had been a test, a challenge to their awareness, their courage, and their understanding. And somehow, against the impossible odds, the Hendersons had endured. Relief flooded the room, but it was short. Daniel Rivers, scanning the walls, noticed a faint outline of writing forming in the dust along the windowsill. He leaned closer, reading aloud. They learn, they remember, they return. Harper's blood ran cold. The messages, the shadows, the test, they were far from over. The presence wasn't finished. It was patient, deliberate, and now it had learned from them. The Hendersons had survived this night, but the warning was clear. The cycle would continue. and no one, not even Maplewood, was truly safe. As they left the house, the town felt unchanged on the surface, yet everyone who knew the story sensed it. The darkness had tested them, observed them, and for now, retreated. But it remained. The Henderson family's ordeal was over, but the mystery of Maplewood was far from solved. Harper knew that the next time, the shadows might not be so forgiving, and the next family might not be as fortunate. In the weeks that followed, life in Maplewood returned to a fragile semblance of normal. Children played in the yards again. Neighbors spoke without fear, and the town tried to forget the events of that night. But subtle signs persisted. A shadow at the edge of a street lamp, the faint whisper of wind through a silent alley, or a glimpse of movement in a window that no one was in. The Hendersons themselves changed. They were cautious, alert, forever aware that the unseen presence might return. And the final twist came quietly, almost unnoticed. One evening, Mary found a small envelope on her porch. No handwriting, no stamps, just a single line inside. "We were only the first." Harper read it last, and for the first time in weeks, a sense of dread washed over him that was heavier than ever before. The family had survived the impossible, but the story was far from over. The mystery that had consumed Maplewood tested its families, and challenged logic itself was only beginning to reveal its full scope. The shadows had not left, they had only chosen a pause, waiting for the next moment to return. The climax had been reached. The family reunited, the immediate danger survived, but the town, the people, and Harper all knew one undeniable truth. Maplewood's darkness was patient, intelligent, and still very much alive. And somewhere, beyond the streetlights, beyond the whispers, the next test had already begun. In the days following the events at the Henderson house, Maplewood began to settle into an uneasy calm. The streets looked the same, houses were lit in the familiar golden glow of porch lights, and children returned to playing in the yards. On the surface, life seemed to have returned to normal. But those who had witnessed the ordeal knew that nothing could ever truly be the same. Harper walked the streets quietly, observing the town with a new understanding. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every flicker of light seemed to hold weight, a reminder of the events that had shaken Maplewood to its core. The Henderson family adjusted to life back home, carrying with them the memories of a night that had tested them beyond reason. Mary resumed teaching at the elementary school, though she often caught herself pausing, staring into the distance as if expecting the impossible to return. Robert went back to the hardware store, working with his usual calm efficiency, but there was a wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Emma and Jack returned to their routines, though their laughter now carried a careful, measured tone, and they often played in ways that reflected lessons learned about attention, awareness, and the unpredictability of the world. Detective Harper stayed close to the family in the weeks that followed, not out of doubt, but out of understanding. He knew that the Hendersons' survival was extraordinary. A rare moment where preparation and courage had met the inexplicable with strength. He spent hours reviewing notes, photos, and the cryptic messages that had been left behind. Each piece reinforced a chilling truth. Maplewood's mysteries were far from over. The shadows had retreated, yes, but they had left lessons in their wake. The disappearance had been part of a pattern, and the Hendersons had been forced to learn that pattern to survive. Meanwhile, Daniel Rivers continued to document the events, careful not to sensationalize but eager to reveal the story in its full context. His articles explored not only the Henderson disappearance but the subtle history of Maplewood, where similar events had quietly occurred decades earlier. Readers were fascinated, some skeptical, others fearful, but all drawn to the idea that even in a quiet, ordinary town, the extraordinary could exist just beneath the surface. Rivers emphasized that the story wasn't about fear, it was about awareness, vigilance, and the strength of the human spirit when confronted with the unknown. The town itself began to reflect on what had happened. Community meetings were held to discuss safety, not just in the physical sense but emotionally and psychologically. Neighbors shared experiences that had once seemed trivial: a fleeting shadow, an unusual noise, a small object out of place, but which, in hindsight, were pieces of a larger puzzle. Maplewood's residents realized that the events surrounding the Hendersons were not simply isolated. They were a reminder that even familiar places could hold secrets beyond ordinary understanding. Subplots that had woven quietly through the story also reached a resolution. Mrs. Ellison's grandson, once terrified by what he thought he had seen, was reassured and guided to understand that fear could be acknowledged without controlling life. The local historian continued his work, documenting patterns that span generations, helping the town understand that awareness and knowledge could be powerful tools against the inexplicable. Harper, Rivers, and the Hendersons together became a subtle force of vigilance, teaching the town how to watch, notice, and respond without letting fear dominate. Even with these resolutions, Harper understood that some questions could never be fully answered. The precise nature of the force that had taken the Hendersons, the rules it followed, and the reason for its patience remained a mystery. And yet, that uncertainty did not diminish the victory of survival. The family had endured, had learned, and had come back. That in itself was an answer, a statement about resilience and courage in the face of the unknown. Harper often reflected on this, knowing that some mysteries were meant to test, not necessarily to be fully solved. The final twist. The small envelope Mary had found on her porch, marked simply with "We were only the first," remained a subtle reminder that life in Maplewood would always carry echoes of what had happened. The message was ambiguous, unnerving, but it also held a quiet truth. The world contained mysteries beyond ordinary understanding, and the Hendersons' survival was proof that awareness, unity, and courage could confront even the impossible. The family had been tested and had prevailed, but the lesson was clear: the unknown was patient, and vigilance must be constant. Over time, Maplewood returned to its gentle rhythms. Children played, neighbors conversed, and the Hendersons gradually reclaimed the sense of normalcy they had lost. Yet Harper noticed small changes everywhere. Conversations carried a new attentiveness. People paused before dismissing unusual events, and even the simplest noises in the night were met with awareness rather than fear. The town had been marked by the experience, not broken by it. Life continued, but with a deeper appreciation for the fragility and resilience of human life. The Hendersons themselves carried a quiet strength. Mary's teaching was enriched with lessons of observation and mindfulness. Robert's work at the hardware store became a metaphor for patience and problems. Emma's curiosity was tempered with discernment. And Jack, though young, learned lessons about awareness and bravery in subtle ways that only a child could understand. The family had been given back their lives, but with a wisdom born from facing the extraordinary, a wisdom that now guided every action they took. In reflecting on the story as a whole, the key takeaway was clear. Life could be disrupted in ways beyond reason, and challenges could appear without warning. But courage, awareness, and unity could provide the strength needed to confront even the unexplainable. Harper, Rivers, and the Hendersons had survived the impossible together, leaving a blueprint for resilience that the town would carry forward. Even the final detail, the faint messages, the shadows, the whispers served as a reminder that the world was larger and more complex than appearances suggested. Maplewoods.com might seem restored, but the experience had left an indelible mark on everyone who had lived through it. Fear was replaced with awareness. Despair was replaced with vigilance. And while the Hendersons had returned, the story of Maplewood itself was now richer, filled with lessons about courage, observation, and the unpredictable nature of life. As Harper stood outside the Henderson house one evening, looking at the glow of the windows and hearing the distant laughter of the children, he allowed himself a quiet exhale. The family was home. They were safe. And for now, the darkness that had tested them had receded. But the detective knew, as did the residents of Maplewood, that vigilance was eternal. The shadows might return, in another time, another place. But the lessons of this night, the courage, the unity, the awareness would endure. Maplewood had survived its trial, and the Hendersons had returned as a testament to human strength. The mystery remained, subtle and haunting, a reminder that life was full of unknowns. But, in the face of fear and uncertainty, hope, resilience, and attentiveness could illuminate even the darkest corners. And so, the town carried on, changed but unbroken, with a story that would be remembered, shared, and reflected upon for generations. The Hendersons' ordeal had ended, but Maplewood's awareness had only just begun. Shadows remained, whispers lingered, and the night held secrets that would challenge the next generation. Yet, for now, the family was together, the town was safe, and life, fragile and unpredictable, continued with a newfound appreciation for the unseen forces that shape our world.